Hello, my name is Yvonne Matore. Today I'd like to take you through the journey of my final major project thus far. I will start by sharing my initial research with you, then go on to tell you about the development of my project work itself. So, at the end of the last term, I was settled on exploring pattern and modular design. I have begun this term by focusing closer first on the pattern with the intention of bringing modular design alongside it as the project develops further. So my starting point was taking a closer look at pattern. One of the most exciting things that have emerged from Term 1 and Term 2 project has been that my project so far have become about pattern. This was an unwitting development born out of the design process that I have undertaken. The emergence of pattern as the main theme for my final major project has been exciting for me because pattern has been an area of interest for me since my undergraduate studies. The point now in my final major project is to review my existing knowledge about pattern and either challenge or consolidate what I know. My intention has also been to add to the knowledge and to develop my current practice alongside it. So, what is pattern? According to the Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary, the Oxford Dictionary, the Collins English Dictionary, pattern is the regular way in which something happens or is done. Pattern is about regular arrangements of shapes, lines, and colors, and is a repeated, comparable, and intelligible form of sequence. Pattern does not have to be identical, shapes, lines, or colors. And the definition I find most interesting is that pattern is a language created by multiples, a language of communication. So what about irregular patterns? Well, through my research, I have come to the conclusion that as long as a design or an object meets the criteria of repetition and of the elements within it being closely related or the same, it qualifies as pattern. In the image, in this example, the beading, the materiality, the coloring, and the vertical nature of the design all qualify it as pattern. It's speaking the same language and therefore it is pattern. I also looked at the wider definitions of pattern, and I was interested in these to see how the word pattern is used beyond design. So for example, a drawing or a shape to show how something is made, like a knitting or a dress pattern. Something that is used as an example, especially to copy. A particular way in which something is done, for example, in organizations or in families, and we hear of the talk of behavior patterns, something that is recognizably consistent or that is a series, for example, a pattern of discrimination or racketeering activity. And the one that I found most poignant in terms of these definitions was a distribution of shrapnel or bombs on a target or patterns of bullets, for example. My three favorite definitions amongst the wider definitions that I found are these three, and this is around the form or a model that's proposed for imitation, a drawing or a shape that is used to show how something should be done or how to make something. And the one that I like the most out of these three is a natural or chance configuration, for example, in frost or coral patterns. And I particularly like this because it chimes well with the way I am developing my practice. I'm currently working with the umbrella of function follows form. So everything, all the forms that are developing, all the patterns that are developing are developing very organically and are emerging as the process, as the design process develops. So there is an element of natural development, an element of chance development in my exploration and inquiry of pattern. some types of pattern. Now, the particular patterns that I was really interested in are described by Ching et al. In 2005, and they assert that there are two types of pattern. One is applied pattern, which is surface or aesthetic pattern, and the other is structural pattern, which is intrinsic to the construction of an object or a building. Now, my favorite of these two and the one that I'm pursuing in my inquiry is the structural pattern, which is the intrinsic one to the construction of the object or the building. In my precedent study, I pursued this line of inquiry and looked at examples of patterns that are intrinsic to the structure of the building. My favorite example is the baptistry of St. John, which was built in or finished in 1128 in Florence. And I like this one. Now, this particular design is built from sandstone on the inside, and then it's got a geometrically patterned marble exterior. Now, without the marble exterior, the baptistry isn't what it is. It isn't as grand or as beautiful or as stunning as it is. Additionally, the pattern is communicating. So I spoke about a language that is communicated by pattern. And in this particular instance, to 12th century audience who were possibly unable to read, the pattern may very well be communicating the awe of God to its viewers. Another pattern that I'm particularly interested in is the Institute of the Arab World, which was finished in 1987. And I like this particular pattern because not only is it intrinsic to the structure of the building, but also to its function. Now, the photosensitive apertures in the images adjust automatically to the level of light that's coming into the building. And the design itself is inspired by traditional Islamic art and architecture, in particular the 8 points. The third precedent study that I really liked was the Gherkin in London. And I particularly liked this one by Norman Foster, finished in 2003. I particularly liked this pattern because it is the very essence of the design of this building, both aesthetically and structurally. In my own practice, I developed these three-dimensional forms that were based on geometric patterns, and the pattern within these designs is intrinsic to the structure of the forms. One of the key things that I wanted to do in pursuing this line of inquiry about pattern and form is reviewing the integrity of the journey that I've taken so far in my project, in my master's project. And the purpose really I wanted to examine was to make sure that the connections that I've made right from the beginning, right from the original map, through to the three-dimensional forms is sound, that the connections are sound. And I also wanted to consolidate the process that I've undertaken and check the integrity of all the developments of the forms in my final outcomes. One of the things that I was really checking closely was making sure especially that the shapes that I developed right from the start were consistent throughout the whole process. In my practice and through reviewing this process, I discovered another underlying pattern which has developed quite unwittingly and quite interestingly. And one of the elements of this pattern is that I've been translating 2D images to 3D forms, back to 2D, and so forth. For example, I translated the original 2D map to scale from the map to 2D sketching, then extruded that and translated that to a three-dimensional model, which I then photographed back to 2D and then brought back to life in the 3D cubes that were part of the Exploring Territories exhibition. I'm really interested in this 2D, 3D, 2D, 3D pattern that's emerging underneath all of my work and all of my practice. So in my experimentations, I have taken these three-dimensional forms, and the first thing I have done is to take out the scales, because I think that the scale that I had included at the end of last term had suggested function, and I'm trying to work without function to develop, to see what forms, what new forms and what new patterns emerge. So what I'm doing really is a lot of sketching, a lot of layering, examining these emerging forms, examining the emerging patterns, and sticking to the rule that I have set myself, which is function following the form. I've continued to do this and developing these emerging forms by introducing various scales and beginning to associate some of these sketches with possible functions. This particular one is my favorite at the moment. I like it because it is quirky, it is oddly shaped, it doesn't immediately lend itself to function, and therefore it can be explored from any angle really. So my experiments have started here. I have continued pursuing this line of inquiry by experimenting with scale and possible functions, and I have been making sketches at various scales using the elements of my favorite form, which I have discussed in the previous slide, and really experimenting to see what emerges at different scales using the same form. So examples of sketches, forms that emerged from this exercise are these two forms at the moment that are at 2 centimeters large, and one of them could easily be a necklace, and another element of the form could be a science fiction microchip key. At 2 meters, the same part of that form, the same elements of that form can be a workstation, or it can be some sort of sculptural seating. And at 20 meters, it can be some sculpture or a cityscape. I'm continuing to do these experiments, and at 200 meters, some of them are coming out as perhaps landscape gardens in the style of Capability Brown, for example, or very large buildings in the style of Daniel Lipskind, for example. My experiments continue. The next steps, obviously, is to continue developing the experiments and develop the practice towards assigning the function to these emerging forms. I also want to develop this, some sketch models for the emergent forms at varying scales. I'd like to continue to identify patterns within the emerging forms, and I'd also like to continue to identify the underlying 2D, 3D, 2D, 3D patterns that have been emerging throughout my practice, and see how I can incorporate them into a final outcome. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that my presentation has been informative and enjoyable to listen to.